had earlier for Scott Morrison's media conference. With that done though, it's time now for our political panel today on Afternoon Briefing. Liberal MP Jason Falinski's in Sydney and Labor Senator Malarndirri McCarthy's in Darwin. Welcome back to both of you. Yeah, a bit of a sombre mood after these weighty matters of state. But Jason, firstly to you, it rather puts a lie to some of the artificially heated language that we might have heard about national security fracturing around here a week or so ago. When the big stuff comes forward, we discover bipartisanship's pretty rock solid on national security, isn't it?
Well, Greg, I think this is not terribly appropriate time for us to get into that, but I would make the observation that it's on the big stuff that people can agree. Chamberlain and Churchill finally did agree. The point is, can you take action before the big stuff happens? You want the situation not to become big, and those differences do make a very big difference in the end.
All right, Mal McCarthy, this would be situation normal, wouldn't it, when we have a major threat happening in a place like Ukraine? I think most people, you'd agree, look to the two parties of government to get on the same page. We're seeing that?
Absolutely, Greg, and we heard Anthony Albanese say there that Australia does stand strong and stand together when we do look at these issues of national security and concerns in international sort of the arena, and that has actually been the case anyway, despite what Jason Falinski says. We have stood firm in terms of international interests, and we certainly do today. All
right, now there could be a bit of blowback here coming in different ways, fallout if you like. Let's step through some of those. One, we just heard discussed there and earlier by Scott Morrison, it's what always happens with war or conflict, an outflow of refugees. Malarndirri McCarthy, to you first of all, what should Australia be doing for planning there with refugee intake numbers? Should we be increasing the overall number, dedicating a certain number to Ukrainians? We saw it with Afghanistan. I guess we may see it with Ukraine. How do we prepare for that?
Well, we should always be preparing for it, really, Greg, and we should have done it much better in terms of Afghanistan. We could see what was going on there well in advance. We certainly need to be mindful of what could happen here with Ukraine, but again, as Senator Penny Wong has also reiterated, that we're following that closely. I know she's working very closely with Senator Payne. This is something that Labor does take seriously, and does so even when there is no imminent threat of war, Greg. We're still worried about the refugees still in our country who should be out in the community.
Right, so that would be to you then, Jason, temporary protection visas. If you're going to bring, let's say, a few hundred or even a few thousand Ukrainians to Australia under the circumstances of war, why would you put them on some sort of bridging or temporary arrangement? Why not add them to a permanent refugee intake right off the top?
Yeah, look, Greg, that's effectively what we did in the case of Syria under the Abbott government. As the son of a migrant who came from this part of the world, I certainly can't sit here and say that I'm opposed to people coming to Australia who are fleeing conflict, who are fleeing oppression.
Just the legal basis on which they come, I guess, Jason, whether they...
It always does. And Australia stands ready and able, frankly, to do the heavy lifting and to take a far greater burden than our population or our size would otherwise indicate. That has been our historical position, and that's the position we'll maintain. So
some sort of one-off extra addition to the annual intake?
Greg, as I'm sure you can understand, I'm not in a position to announce government policy. Yeah, sure. The situation is very fluid, but what I can point to is previous circumstances, such as what occurred in Syria, where we did have a one-off intake, I think over 3 years. It was targeted at those parts of that community that were being targeted by the aggressors in that country. And I'm sure that would be one of the options on the table for the Prime Minister to consider.
All right, another piece of fallout we're told could be cyber attacks. I won't ask you about those because we're really not in control of them. But the other is, of course, the fuel price that we pay at the Bowser. And I suppose even at the best of times, Malarndirri McCarthy, it's never cheap in Darwin or the remote NT.
It's pretty high up here in ordinary circumstances anyway, especially if you're travelling out in the long distances, Greg. But,
so you'd be shuddering at the prospect of prices that could go and sit for some time well above $2 a litre.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've got enough problems with remote and regional areas. Our cattle stations who've got to get their cattle into country and on the exports. We've got our ranger groups who need to be travelling with their boats, looking after the seas. If we have fuel going up at extraordinary prices, it's going to impact the ordinary Australian, and that's something we do have to watch and make sure doesn't happen.
And any role for government policy there? I know there aren't that many tools governments have on fuel prices. Excise and other forms of tax are there, of course, but what do we do? Just ride the market waves and hope they come down?
Well, certainly from this end, you're going to hear lots of complaints if it goes all the way, and we've got the Prime Minister still in government. We've got Jason Falinski, you're right there. You guys need to be watching this and making sure that ordinary punters don't have those oil prices go up and petrol prices go up, because the standard of living today is not where it should be anyway, and we've seen that as a fault of wages not growing as well.
So real prospects, Jason Falinski, for further erosion of the household budget here? I mean, this would be a real risk, particularly through the course of an election campaign built on economic management.
Look, oil prices are, Greg, as Senator has been pointing out eloquently, have fluctuations. They go up.
Why, thank you, Jason.
Sorry?
Why, thank you.
Oh, no problem.
Just
anytime.
do something about it, that's all.
You know, short of Australia finding a lot of oil under our somewhere offshore or in our continent, and besides that, I'm not in favour of pumping up more oil in any case. But Greg, I think one of the things that we'll see out of this is this will add fire or put further fuel to the fire, if you pardon the pun, to the great transition that we're seeing from internal combustion engine cars to electric vehicles. And it highlights the importance of the federal government's support for development and research and development into hydrogen fuel cell cars and in particularly freight vehicles.
Right, but it could do more, couldn't it?
You know,
aren't there plenty in that industry actually saying we should be removing a whole bunch of taxes to incentivise, as economists use the word, incentivise EVs?
Yeah. So to be blunt with you, I'm one of those people. I think that we shouldn't apply a lot of the luxury car taxes that we apply to electric vehicles at the passenger end, and in the hydrogen cell freight end. I certainly think that there are areas there in the tax system where we should be removing distortionary taxes that have an impact on people taking up those vehicles, particularly farmers and miners, but freight generally. So I think that while this is going to cause some pain in the short term, hopefully will lead to medium and long-term adjustments that are massively beneficial to both our economy, national security, and of course our environment as well.
All right, now some of our time crimped today, Mal McCarthy, by other events which we've already discussed, but you introduced the idea of wage figures coming out today, and they really are, I suppose, rising but sluggish. Can the government, or any government, lead the way here with at least public sector wage increases if they remain stubbornly low? That much they do control.
Well, we certainly have to see something change here, and governments have the levers that they can pull in this, both state and territory and federal, obviously, Greg. But what I'd like to say, send a message, as I did last time, is that Australians right across the country are suffering in terms of cost of living. Their wages have not gone up compared to the cost of living in this country. And we've seen, obviously, the pandemic and other factors that have impacted, but this is the time to create that change and give hope to families right across this country. And
what about the corporates and their profitability, Jason? Just in response to Mal's call, is there room to start the wage increases soon?
Well, Greg, this is a very complex area. Since the Fair Work Act was introduced by the Rudd-Gillard government, we have seen real wage increases fall basically to zero. But what we're
For
seeing
a range
at the
of
moment,
factors, I suppose.
well, not really, because ultimately what drives wage growth in Australia is productivity, and productivity happens when companies and workforces come together to work out how to do something better. And what we've seen is the Fair Work Commission over and over again the efforts of companies to pass on higher wages to workers. The other 2 points that I'd like to make is that we are seeing an acceleration in wages, but as the Reserve Bank Governor pointed out a couple of weeks ago, the problem is in putting these statistics together is that people are moving jobs. And so when you move, Greg, from your highly paid job now to an even more highly paid job, maybe reading the news at 7 o'clock, because that's a new job, it doesn't capture your increase in salary. And we're seeing that a lot around Australia at the moment because there are a lot of people coming into the workforce. Participation rates have never been higher than they are at the moment.
Sure.
And I think we just need a couple of months for the official statistics to catch up to what corporates are reporting anecdotally to
Greg,
government.
can I just
Really
pick
quickly,
Jason
yeah,
up there?
really
I
quickly,
have to, escalating wages, I'd really like to know where, Jason. You just walk down the streets here in Darwin, in Alice Springs, people are not in businesses. Those escalating wages are certainly not happening at this end of the country.
No, point made. Jason, I'm going to have to cut you both off there because we are fresh out of time. Just seconds remaining. That's afternoon briefing for today. We'll continue that discussion another time.